12 ordinary items that vanish from shelves in under 6 hours once the electrical grid goes completely silent. The real danger is not that they become scarce, but that you will not recognize the gap in your own readiness until your hand reaches for empty air. In the very first hours after the lights die, the world maintains a fragile illusion of normalcy. The pantry appears full, the tap still runs, and the clock on the wall has simply stopped ticking. There is no siren, no explosion, just a heavy quiet settling over the room. You look at your stockpile and think you have bought yourself weeks of time. But underneath that stillness, a silent clock is racing, and the things you took for granted are evaporating from the local shelves faster than the condensation on a cold glass. They do not vanish with a riot or a crash. They vanish one card at a time, removed by people who understand the secret language of entropy. By the moment your mind finally connects the dots and screams that you require something essential, that item has long since been carried out the door. Not because you were foolish or slow, but because the pace of loss in a grid-down scenario is a sprint you never trained for. And if you think your current closet of supplies is a fortress, wait until we reach item number 7. That is the exact point in the timeline where the mental fog lifts for the majority, and they realize they have overlooked the most basic, unglamorous necessity of all. 12. Compact fuel canisters. The alchemy that transforms your stored rations into actual sustenance. The crisis is not a lack of calories. It is the sudden impotence of your modern kitchen. In those opening hours, people stand in front of open pantries and feel a wave of false confidence. Bags of dried pasta, stacks of tin cans, jars of sauce arranged like soldiers ready for a long siege. But then the first real hunger pang hits, coinciding with the first sunset without the hum of the refrigerator, and a stark revelation lands like a brick. The gleaming electric ignition does not click. The microwave window remains a dark, dead eye. And almost every single meal plan you had written in your head is rendered inert, not by a lack of ingredients, but by the neutralization of the process itself. It is a cruel irony. You are surrounded by food, but suddenly living like a king who forgot the key to the treasury. You might have a mountain of sustenance, but without the means to apply thermal energy, without the capacity to sterilize a pot of water, your preparations are downgraded from survival to mere collection. This is the blind spot that fells the modern prepper. They stock the meal but neglect the method. A particularly piercing piece of feedback I recall went roughly like this. I have enough calories for a month, but I couldn't warm up a single bowl of soup. It is a laughable tragedy, but it is the stark truth that only crystallizes after the initial shock fades. When you face the prospect of eating cold beans and congealed fat for an indefinite stretch, you begin to perceive the chasm between possessing food and being able to consume a morale-sustaining meal. The quiet dignity of a hot drink or a warm plate is not a luxury. It is the glue that holds your psychological resolve together. The true leverage of a fuel cylinder lies not in the metal itself, but in its role as the master key to your entire larder. A single, modest gas canister paired with a rudimentary camping stove gives you dominion over boiling, frying, and warming. Tasks so mundane in the grid era become monumental achievements in its absence. It is not the loudest piece of gear in your house, but it is the silent engine that keeps your survival system in gear. You need not hoard a pallet. You need a working, tested system and the foresight to have it ready before the switch is flipped. A simple portable burner with several backup canisters safely stored is a monumental advantage over total electric dependence. And practice. Run a test run while the sun is still shining and the world is predictable. Because in the fog of a genuine blackout, you want muscle memory, not an instruction manual covered in dust. You have provisions for days on end, but do you possess the key to unlock their potential? And it is precisely at this juncture that the next necessity, a gadget that seems almost quaint, looms far larger than you ever imagined. 11. The standalone radio receiver. The thread that ties you to reality when every other digital tether is severed. You must burn a critical truth into your memory, one that escapes the vast majority of smartphone-dependent citizens. When the substations fail, it is not the light that abandons you first. It is the flow of actionable intelligence. And when you are severed from the wider narrative, You are not merely inconvenienced. You are rendered directionless and strategically blind. That is precisely why handheld radios evaporate from the shelves with such stunning velocity. Not because every panicked soul instantly thinks of them, but because the seasoned minority who have weathered previous storms understand the bone-deep terror of silence. In practice, cellular networks do not simply cease in an instant. They gasp for breath on backup generators for a window of time. But as the fuel tanks run dry across the city, the towers wink out one by one like dying stars. The data speed throttles to nothing, voice calls splinter into static, and eventually, the no-service message becomes a permanent fixture on the screen. At that moment, anyone leaning solely on a glass rectangle is plunged into an information vacuum. They are blind to evacuation corridors, deaf to emergency directives, and incapable of distinguishing between a safe haven and a growing hazard. When the facts are gone, the human mind fills the void with guesswork. And in the calculus of survival, guesswork is the step right before calamity. This is the moment where the humble battery-operated receiver assumes an almost mythic value. No reliance on congested Wi-Fi spectrum, no need for a pristine signal, merely a couple of alkaline cells or a few cranks of a dynamo, and suddenly the voice of authority, or even just the local weather band, is back in the room. Those holding a radio are not necessarily more intelligent, but they possess a singular, overwhelming edge. They have context, and that context alone is a potent sedative against the contagious mania of the herd. Radios clear out swiftly not due to rarity of manufacture, but due to the lateness of the hour when most remember their existence. When the cell tower icons vanish and the world outside the window becomes a quiet, unnerving mystery, that is the exact second the scramble for connection begins. But like fresh water after a main break, by then the queue has already formed and the stock is depleted. The remedy is laughably straightforward. You are not launching a satellite. You are buying a small, self-powered receiver. A unit with a crank and batteries, placed not in a forgotten drawer but in the designated crisis area. What you are stockpiling here is not plastic and wire. It is the raw material for sound judgment when the fog of war rolls in. So, if the grid betrays you tonight, will you have a window to the world beyond your driveway? Or will you be left to decode the world through shadows and secondhand rumor? And this line of thinking flows seamlessly into the next object, a mundane roll of material that carries a disproportionately high return on investment. 10. Contractor-grade waste bags. The utility item that slips away in the quiet moments before the frenzy peaks. The tools that the masses deem trivial are frequently the very ones that safeguard your comfort in the 11th hour. In the initial scramble of a power system collapse, the human tide surges toward the aisles marked water, batteries, and bread. Those zones transform into vortexes of anxiety and sharp elbows. Yet in the far corner of the hardware or home goods section, where the lighting is slightly dimmer and the crowd is absent, a critical drawdown is happening in plain sight. Rolls of thick, industrial-strength plastic bags are being lifted, but not by the unit, by the case. The uninitiated overlook them because the item lacks the immediate visceral label of survival. They see a garbage bag. The knowledgeable see a waterproof membrane, a vapor barrier, and a portable container. A heavy-duty bag can serve as an emergency poncho when you need to traverse a downpour to secure a resource. It can function as a vapor barrier between your sleeping body and the cold, moisture-wicking earth. It can be stretched as a crude yet effective windbreak to shield a fragile flame or a shivering child. Beyond that, it becomes a receptacle for rainwater collection, a protector for dry socks and ammunition, or the cornerstone of a sanitation plan when the toilet bowl no longer flushes and the pipes are silent. A single object, a spectrum of applications, all of which ascend to critical importance the moment modern infrastructure takes a leave of absence. This explains why the veterans of disruption make a silent beeline for this aisle while the rest of the world is still jockeying for the last pack of hot dog buns. Why does this particular supply bleed out so fast? It is not because the global supply of plastic is low. It is because the retail inventory in a standard store is thin, and the handful of people who know the secret buy with a deep basket. By the time the broader public realizes they need to stay dry, preserve heat, or manage waste, The shelf is a long, empty stretch of metal. The path to avoiding this trap is elementary. Procure the rolls now, in the season of ease. They are cheap to acquire, they store flat in a closet, and they have an almost indefinite shelf life. You may not touch them for a calendar year, but the moment you need to create a dry microclimate or haul 50 pounds of essential items through the mud, you will appreciate them more than the fanciest gadget you own. So, if you were forced to evacuate or secure your shelter in a cold, soaking rain, do you have that simple, durable, versatile layer of protection? Or will you be left trying to salvage cardboard boxes that are turning to mush? And this awareness guides us directly to the next disappearing act, an item that almost everyone claims they have enough of, yet it vaporizes faster than almost anything else. 9. Point-of-use water purification tools. The line between having a liquid and having a safe drink. A staggering 90% of people stockpile this category incorrectly. They operate under the flawed assumption that owning a tower of plastic jugs is the end of the story. In the opening sequence of a blackout, that is precisely the behavior of the mob. They swarm the pallets of bottled water, loading carts until the wheels buckle. Meanwhile, the quiet shelf holding the filters, the purification tablets, and the treatment straws remains untouched, a lonely island of sanity in a sea of panic. It does not scream urgency in the first hour, but there is always a contingent of quiet actors who move differently. They do not join the water rush. They are looking for a way to break the dependency on a finite, heavy, and difficult-to-transport resource. And it only requires a few of these forward-thinking individuals arriving early for that limited stock of filters to vanish. By the time the masses have drained their store of jugs and realize that 40 gallons is a rapidly dwindling puddle, they circle back to find the solution aisle barren. The profound worth of a filter only reveals itself after the grid has been down for a sustained period. By that juncture, municipal water pressure may have dropped, allowing contaminants to seep into the lines. Or you may have resorted to secondary sources like rain barrels or natural creeks, sources that are alive with unseen biology. You may still have moisture, but you no longer have a guarantee of its safety. This is where the separation occurs. Those with a filter or chemical treatment capability maintain their calm and their gastrointestinal health. Those without begin the slow, anxious calculation of risk versus thirst. The function is elegantly simple, but it is definitive. It converts a questionable water source into a life-sustaining resource. Whether it is the dregs of the hot water heater, the contents of a rain barrel, or even a nearby stream, a filter grants you an option set that the unprepared cannot access. The operation is not the domain of engineers. Most personal filters require only drawing water through the element or using gravity. No power cord, no complex priming, just physics and chemistry. But the linchpin is having it in your possession prior to the moment of need. Because when the light bulb in your head finally flickers on regarding water treatment, the store's inventory of such items will have been extinct for hours. This is why it clears out so quickly. Not a stampede of the masses, but a surgical extraction by the knowledgeable few. If your usual tap turns to rust and sediment, do you have the means to make the next cup safe? Or will you be the one staring at an empty shelf, realizing you bet everything on plastic bottles that are now empty? And that brings us to the item that everyone swarms immediately, ensuring its shelf life in a crisis is measured in minutes, not hours. 8. Flame creation devices. The ignition sources that vanish the very second the reality of a cold, dark night sets in. The more ubiquitous an item is in daily life, the more vulnerable it is to a complete inventory wipeout. In the early stages of a power outage, a peculiar complacency sets in regarding fire. People think, I've got a drawer full of matches somewhere, or there's a lighter in the junk drawer. That assumption acts as a tranquilizer, keeping the aisle for matches and lighters quiet and uncrowded for a brief deceptive window. There is no early stampede here. The panic is deferred. But that calm is a false prophet. Someone once recounted an experience from a protracted regional blackout. On day one, the focus was strictly on securing water and confirming the generator fuel. The pantry was stocked, the mind was calm. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the house became a tomb of shadows, a specific primal need arose. boiling water for a meal and creating a beacon against the dark. It was then, with a pot of cold noodles waiting, that they discovered the junk drawer lighter was empty. The box of matches in the cupboard had been used for birthday candles months ago and never replaced. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, they drove to the nearest open retailer. What they encountered was not a riot, but a void. A long, empty pegboard where disposable lighters once hung in rainbow colors. No matches, no flints, just the ghost of convenience. Many people harbor the fantasy that they can simply rub two sticks together or strike a rock against steel in a pinch. While theoretically possible, those methods demand fine motor skills, specific material conditions, and time. In a high-stress environment, when your hands are cold and your patience is frayed, that is not the moment for a bushcraft tutorial. You need flame now, not an hour from now. Lighters and matches are not just for the stove. They are the ignition for your entire operational baseline. Cooking, boiling, purifying, signaling, and simply seeing what is in front of you. When electrons stop flowing, these simple tools are the bedrock of domestic continuity. Because they are so cheap and so common, they are the victims of a mass delusion of "I can always grab them later." The reality is a hard inversion. The simplest, cheapest tools are the first to vanish because the barrier to grabbing them is so low that when everyone decides later is now, the cupboard is bare. 7. Stored energy cells and backup power banks. The lifeblood that prevents your essential gear from becoming a collection of expensive paperweights. The greatest vulnerability here is not a shortage of manufacturing capacity. It is the homogeneity of modern thinking. When the wall socket is alive, you walk right past the battery display without a second thought. You plug in your phone, you charge your tablet, you forget that these devices are, in essence, tethered captives. But when the grid drops, you suddenly find yourself in a house full of objects that are physically present but functionally deceased. Flashlights that won't blink. Radios that won't hiss. Clocks frozen in time. Even the television remote is a dead stick. All of them are dependent on a tiny stored charge that you previously treated as an afterthought. What makes this shortage so insidious is the trivial cost of prevention. A 4-pack of alkaline A cells is often less expensive than a specialty coffee. A power bank to jumpstart a phone is cheaper than a dinner out. Yet precisely because the unit cost is so low, the preparation is often deferred indefinitely. People acquire the gadgets but neglect the fuel. Or they have a drawer full of corroded, leaking cells that they haven't checked since the last time they changed the smoke detector battery. It seems like a minor detail, but this is the exact juncture where the wheels start to come off the wagon. A tactical flashlight that relies on 2 specific batteries will not illuminate a week of darkness on that single set. A vital emergency radio is just a sculpted piece of plastic without a reservoir of energy to drive the speaker. The crisis is not whether you own the tool, but whether you can command it to function on day 4, day 5, and beyond. No expertise required, no setup delay. Just insert the cell, and the device returns from the dead. In a landscape defined by complication and friction, this simplicity is the ultimate advantage. It restores your ability to see, to hear, and to maintain a sense of agency over your immediate environment. Do not just buy a loose pack for the junk drawer. Audit your devices. Calculate the specific energy appetite of each critical piece of gear. Every light and every radio should have at least one full set of replacement cells dedicated solely to it. And better yet, combine disposable alkalines with a small solar panel or a power bank to recharge the lithium-ion devices you rely on most. And the most critical step? Cycle them. Check the charge annually. Batteries left to languish for years in a hot garage are liabilities, not assets. A few dollars spent now on fresh cells determines whether you sit in the dark or maintain your operational rhythm. How many battery-dependent tools are within arm's reach right now, and are you certain they are ready to wake up? And as we continue down this list, the next item is one that dictates what you can actually see when the sun abandons you. 6. Personal illumination tools, the beam that cuts through the void. The loss of electricity is a problem, but it is the immediate, suffocating darkness that is the true shock to the system. When the ambient light vanishes, The familiar geometry of your own home becomes a hostile, unknown terrain. Sharp corners on the coffee table, toys left on the stairs, the simple act of locating a pair of shoes all become exercises in fumbling frustration and potential injury. A large portion of the population believes a single flashlight, perhaps the one in the glove box of the car, is sufficient. This is the common and painful error. They have the lumens but fail to account for the operational reality of living with one hand permanently occupied as a lamppost. Try to cook a meal or sort through a first aid kit while holding a light in your mouth or tucked under your chin. It is awkward, inefficient, and borderline dangerous. That is why the headlamp is not just a convenient upgrade. It is a force multiplier for productivity. It is not about having a brighter bulb. It is about liberating your hands for the tasks that actually matter. Wherever your gaze falls, the illumination follows. This minor ergonomic detail creates a massive psychological and practical schism between being a victim of the darkness and being a functioning operator in it. One piece of feedback that resonated deeply was, "I thought I was all set until I had to hold the flashlight with my teeth to tape up a window." It is a comical image, but it underscores a universal truth. You do not think about these micro-challenges until they are preventing you from executing a critical task. The potency of a flashlight and a headlamp working in tandem lies not just in the photons they emit, but in their ability to sustain normalcy in an abnormal world. You can navigate with confidence, you can perform maintenance, and you can maintain a semblance of routine instead of grinding to a halt when the sun goes down. The preparatory rule here is ironclad: one is none. At a minimum, you want a handheld torch for throw distance and a headlamp for close-up work. Each must have its own independent, dedicated power source. Choose units with multiple output modes to conserve battery life when full power isn't needed. And crucially, stage them. Do not bury them in a bag. Place them in a specific known location where you can lay your hand on them in total darkness without a second thought. Here is a simple test for the skeptical. Tonight, after the family is asleep, trip the main breaker and try to move through your home to the front door as if you were leaving in a hurry. You will instantly understand the difference between thinking you know your home and actually navigating it blind. And once that lesson is learned, you will appreciate why the next item, a staple of daily hygiene, skyrockets in importance. 5. Sanitizing wipes and alcohol-based cleansers. The barrier between you and the creeping filth of a grid-down world. The decline in morale is not always driven by hunger. It is often driven by the slow, persistent sensation that you and your environment are becoming irredeemably soiled. In the opening act of a blackout, personal hygiene products are a distant afterthought. The mind is occupied with water, fire, and sustenance. But within a short span, a new, unsettling sensation begins to creep up the spine and across the skin. Your fingers are tacky with the residue of a meal eaten without a proper wash. Your neck and face feel grimy with the accumulation of dust and sweat from manual labor. And the usual remedy, a long, hot shower, is a memory from a bygone era. Another comment that cut through the noise was, "I didn't think about it until I had no way to wash my hands before handling food." It is a statement of such simplicity, yet it marks the moment the mental shift begins. It is not that you have run out of stored water immediately. It is that you are rationing it so tightly that using a gallon just to wash your hands feels like a criminal waste. The discomfort does not strike like a thunderclap. It builds like a slow, corrosive rust. It saps your energy, makes you irritable, and accelerates the feeling of exhaustion far beyond the physical toll of the labor itself. The greatest mistake is categorizing hygiene as a nice-to-have that can be postponed. In reality, it is a frontline defense. When you are eating, handling debris, or touching surfaces that are no longer sanitized by a modern cleaning routine, the inability to clean your hands and body invites a cascade of secondary issues. It is not merely about feeling sticky. It is about the increased risk of skin irritation, cross-contamination, and the overall weakening of your physical resilience. The utility of wipes and sanitizer lies in their ability to restore a baseline of stability. A quick wipe of the hands before opening a can of food. A refreshing pass over the back of the neck after moving supplies. A moment of cleanliness amidst the chaos. Those small acts create a massive psychological buffer against the grind. Choose fragrance-free, durable wipes. Do not store them all in one bucket. Distribute small packs in your car, your go bag, and your kitchen. And integrate a bottle of hand sanitizer for those times when a wipe would be overkill, but a clean hand is non-negotiable. You can tolerate an empty stomach for a while, but the demoralizing weight of being perpetually dirty will wear you down much faster than you anticipate. So, if the taps run dry and the shower is a distant memory, do you have the tools to stay operationally clean? And this is where the most obvious, yet most misunderstood item enters the frame. 4. Packaged drinking water. The resource everyone thinks about, but almost everyone mishandles. The core issue is rarely whether you have water, but what you are actually storing it in and how you plan to use it. When the power fails, bottled water is the knee-jerk first thought. It is the most visible, the most intuitive, and it provides an immediate, tangible sense of security. You look at the stack of shrink-wrapped cases in the garage and feel a wave of reassurance. But this very obviousness is the trapdoor through which many a good plan falls. Someone shared a story of buying a large quantity of water on the first day of a crisis. They felt invincible, but within a short period, they noticed a disturbing trend. They were using the water on autopilot in exactly the same patterns as when it was infinite and cheap. They'd pour a glass, take a sip, and dump the rest. They'd rinse a utensil without a second thought. The consumption curve was not a straight line. It was a cliff face. The water wasn't disappearing because it was leaking. It was evaporating through ingrained, careless behavior. It is not that there is no water on hand. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the volume required and the discipline required to manage it. Many store enough for a weekend, but consume it like it's a Tuesday afternoon with unlimited refills. In a scenario where the municipal supply is compromised or non-existent, each individual bottle transforms from a cheap commodity into a critical, non-renewable asset. The advantage of bottled water is its convenience and immediate potability. You do not need to filter it. You do not need to treat it. You crack the seal and you drink. In the first chaotic hours, this is a monumental benefit. But its Achilles heel is just as prominent. It is finite. Unlike a filter which can process hundreds of gallons, a case of water only gets lighter and emptier. Once the last bottle is gone, if you have no secondary plan, you are out of options. The tactical advice here is not just buy more, it is manage better. Segment your supply. Allocate a specific number of liters per person per day and strictly adhere to it. A highly effective method is to physically separate drinking-only water from water that might be used for hygiene or cooking in a pinch. And above all, do not allow the existence of a bottled water stack to lull you into ignoring a backup purification method. You believe you have enough water, but are you managing it with the discipline of a quartermaster or the habit of a consumer? And this brings us to the next item, a category that seems straightforward but is riddled with hidden pitfalls. 3. Shelf-stable sustenance, the meal gap nobody plans for. The items everyone thinks they have in abundance, only to find their appetite and patience depleted long before the stockpile. If you were forced to consume the exact same flavor profile for 3 consecutive days, would you still be able to choke it down? When the grid fails, instant noodles, canned stew, and salty snacks are the default choice for the majority. They are accessible, they require minimal preparation, and they create the illusion of a well-stocked bunker. But this very convenience masks a psychological trap that few anticipate. There is a recurrent narrative from long-duration events. A household had purchased a mountain of noodles and canned soup. Day 1 passed smoothly. Hot food was a comfort. By the afternoon of day 2, a subtle reluctance set in. The sight of the can opener or the crinkle of the noodle packet became a source of quiet dread. By the end of day 3, they were skipping meals not because they were out of food, but because they could not stomach the monotony. Their caloric reserves were intact, but their will to eat was shattered. It is not that the body did not require fuel, it was that the mind had closed the kitchen. The error here is focusing strictly on caloric density while ignoring the psychology of consumption. When you are surviving on dry, salty, or repetitive fare, you do not just lose your appetite. You lose energy and focus in ways that sneak up on you. The value of these foods is their ease of use and their long shelf life. You do not need a chef's kitchen to make them work. But that strength is also a weakness. They are not a viable long-term mental health strategy without variation. The actionable tip is diversify the portfolio. Do not just stack cases of the same thing. Combine savory items with sweet treats. Add simple items like crackers with jam, canned fruit in syrup, or even hard candies. These small changes in texture and taste provide a massive boost to morale. And the ultimate test? On a normal, boring Tuesday, try eating only from your emergency stash for 24 hours. You will learn very quickly how long you can actually tolerate it. You may be swimming in calories, but can you stomach them when morale is low and the future is uncertain? And as we approach the final stretch, the next item is one that your body craves before your brain even knows it is missing. 2. Oral rehydration solutions. The specific electrolyte that stabilizes your internal engine. You assume that guzzling plain water is the answer, so why do you feel increasingly lethargic and foggy the more you drink? In the immediate aftermath of a power failure, people do one thing. They reach for water and drink deeply. This is not incorrect, but it is dangerously incomplete. Because your body is not merely losing moisture, it is shedding the mineral salts required to actually hold on to that moisture. The sensation does not arrive like a punch. It is a slow, creeping malaise. A slight dizziness when you stand. A heaviness in the limbs. A difficulty focusing on the task at hand. You instinctively reach for more water, thinking you are still dehydrated, but the relief does not come. Sometimes, you paradoxically feel more drained the more water you consume. This is not simple dehydration. This is an electrolyte imbalance that renders the water you drink ineffective. Someone described enduring a sweltering, powerless summer day. They were pounding water nonstop, but they felt weaker with every passing hour. It was only when they found an old bottle of sports drink at the back of a pantry and consumed it that the fog began to lift. Not because of magic ingredients, but because for the first time all day, their body had received the sodium and potassium it needed to absorb the water they had been drinking. This category of drink does not fill the stomach in the traditional sense. It does not quench thirst like a cold glass of water, but it restores the body's ability to retain that water. It pulls you back from the brink of fatigue and confusion far faster than plain water alone. Many dismiss it as a niche product for athletes or sick children. But when you are in a hot, humid environment without air conditioning, when you are exerting yourself more than usual moving supplies or securing your property, when your body is losing fluids at an accelerated rate you cannot easily measure, these drinks cease to be optional. You do not need a truckload. You just need a few bottles or packets of powder to cover the first wave of the crisis. It can be the difference between functioning at 80% capacity and collapsing into a fog of confusion. You can drink a gallon of water, but if your body cannot lock it in, how much of that gallon are you actually keeping? And that leads us to the final piece of the puzzle, the one directly connected to your physical vessel and the one most often left on the store shelf until it is too late. 1. The basic trauma and medical kit. The buffer that prevents a minor nick from evolving into a major debacle. Dim lighting, unfamiliar physical labor, and heightened stress levels create a perfect storm for accidents that would be laughably trivial under normal conditions. The question is not if you will fumble and cut your finger or develop a splitting headache. The question is whether, when it happens, you have the immediate capacity to address it and move on. A shallow cut from a sharp can lid. A pounding headache from the lack of caffeine and the tension. A sliver from a piece of broken wood you moved in the dark. These are minor inconveniences in a world with running water and a corner pharmacy. But when you cannot simply run to the store, or when seeking professional medical attention is a complex logistical challenge, these tiny injuries begin to gnaw at your operational effectiveness. What many fail to grasp is that small problems do not self-resolve in a high-stress environment. They accumulate, they fester. If you ignore a cut because you cannot clean it properly, it distracts you. It makes you clumsy. It saps your focus and compounds your fatigue. Not because the wound is life-threatening, but because you are dealing with it in a suboptimal, resource-scarce context. The function of a first aid kit is not to perform surgery. It is to act as a firewall. A simple adhesive bandage allows you to keep working without contaminating the wound. A basic analgesic allows you to push past a headache and think clearly. A bit of antiseptic ointment stops the spiral of anxiety about infection. These are very small things, but they are the load-bearing pillars of your physical resilience. Many stockpile exotic gear and overlook these fundamental items, believing they are invincible or that such things only happen to other people. But when you are sleep-deprived, undernourished, and juggling a dozen unknowns, having a familiar, easy-to-use medical tool right at hand saves you not just pain, but precious mental bandwidth. You do not require a paramedic's jump bag. You require a well-thought-out kit containing the basics you know how to use. And crucially, it must be accessible, not buried at the bottom of a sealed tub in the attic. It needs to be where you can reach it with one hand, in the dark, while the other hand is bleeding. Can you neutralize a small crisis in 30 seconds without derailing your entire operation? You do not need to live through a widespread blackout to internalize these lessons. You simply need to take a cold, hard look at the assumptions underpinning your current level of preparedness. It is rarely the high-priced, high-complexity gear that saves the day. It is the quiet, simple, and correctly timed tool that makes the difference. The chasm between those who fare well and those who struggle is not measured in total dollars spent, but in the clarity of understanding one's own supply chain vulnerabilities before the plug is pulled. These items do not vanish because they are rare. They vanish because a critical mass of people recognizes their indispensability at the exact same moment in the timeline. And when that moment arrives, the choice is no longer yours. It was made weeks ago when you decided whether to listen to the quiet voice of preparation or the louder voice of procrastination. If this breakdown of the silent inventory drain resonated with you, please take a second to hit that like button to help my channel reach more people who might need this information before it is too late.